Speaking of the Rams, Ryan, they're in a very, very unique spot. And this has been like a really interesting talking point to have because they're not holding their own first-round pick that's currently in the top 10. They hold the Atlanta Falcons' first-round pick for the trade that the Falcons orchestrated last year in which they went and moved up to go and get James Pierce Jr. Now the Rams are in a spot to find their future quarterback that they could build around if they decided to move up. I personally think, and I know that you're trying to capitalize on a window of Matthew Stafford playing at an MVP level to go to multiple Super Bowls until he decides to call it quits. He's at the very end of his career. You have no idea how long that's going to be. Mm-hmm. I think that in a class where there's not very many good options, if you are enticed by Fernando Mendoza or Dante Moore, and you think that you can build your team around either of them and still find ways to produce and to succeed, I think it would behoove them to move up only if they didn't have to move up into like the top 2 or 3. Say one of these guys slides a little bit, a draft night trade to move up to 5, whatever it might be. Getting a chance to have figured out your future while having your present is something that no franchise typically is able to have on the table for them.
Well, I think the general manager Les Snead, just in theory, he famously said, fuck those picks after they won the Super Bowl, right? Like, he doesn't care about first-round picks, or at least he didn't earlier in this Sean McVay tenure, obviously, a few years ago. So I don't think it's necessarily unprecedented that he would be aggressive in offloading first-round capital. But I do think that the ideology of the Rams, from what I've seen, Joe, as a fan over the years, is they are much more offloading draft capital for veterans, not really guys in the draft. Like, that hasn't really been their forte. Like, they usually move back, if anything, in the draft. They don't usually move up into the draft, right? So I know that there's an apples to orange conversation to a degree because they haven't had a ton of draft capital in the past, and this is kind of a new thing for them. But I actually, I'm against it just off the simple fact it's not often that, because I personally think, I don't know your perspective on this, but I think although the Rams lost to Seattle last week, again, we're recording the week after Seattle, that even though they lost that game, I still think the Rams have an argument as the best team in the NFL right now, and a team that could win the Super Bowl this season. Like, they don't have a crazy amount of flaws. Like, they have a good offensive line. They have a quarterback playing at an MVP level. You have 2 good running backs. You have Puka Nacua, who's the best wide receiver in the NFL, and you have a very good defense under Chris Shula, even though it's had a little bit of leaks at times. But I do think that there's something to be said of preserving that winning window as long as possible, right? And then if there comes a time when Matt Stafford is off to the next venture in his life, I think the Rams are a team that could be aggressive at that point, and Les Snead has shown that he will be aggressive at that point, and Sean McVay has shown that he is open also to being aggressive at that point. When I look at this Rams team, with where they are picking at the back end of the top 10 with that Atlanta Falcons pick and then their own pick that's obviously going to be in the late 20s to early 30s, I do think that this is a team that you could preserve this winning window by taking a couple players that fill the very small amount of needs that you have on your roster. All you need to preserve this winning window is potentially another offensive lineman, potentially another cornerback. Other than that, though, you are set on the defensive line. You just signed Nate Landman to an extension at linebacker. Maybe you go after a safety, but you have a wide receiver, Puka Nacua, who's a legit MVP candidate himself. I think that this Ram team is so good and in such a good spot right now with Matthew Stafford. Although older, he's still 37 years old. So it's not like we're talking about a guy that's hitting 40 like some of these guys are nowadays. I think there's still a year or 2 left of Matt Stafford after this year. I think preserving that winning window and just filling a couple of the last needs with that draft capital, I think would be more beneficial than mortgaging those picks right now to go get a quarterback and waiting. That's kind of my thought process.
One of the things that could be kind of crazy for this, and this is a December conversation. As you say, I agree with you. I think that the Rams are the best team in the NFL right now. That loss that they suffered on Thursday Night Football derailed everything, but it doesn't mean that they still can't go on a run. Their team is
like, it was so so much of a fluky loss. So you're winning by 16 points with 9 minutes left, and then for 5 minutes straight, it was just like chaotic thing after chaotic thing. Like, that's just not replicable as far as losing that way every single week.
But to this point, there's a theoretical possibility that they could go and win a Super Bowl this year. They could win the Super Bowl this year, and I think that, personally, again, I think that they have the best chance of accomplishing that. out of any team. They feel the least flawed. They've got the right momentum that would work in their favor. And for how old Matthew Stafford is and how well he played this year, he could be one of those guys that just straight up says, well, I'd like to end my career on top. And he could retire immediately after. It happens all the time in the NFL where guys at any position recognize, hey, if I keep trying to chase this and I come back next year and maybe physically I'm not the same guy, or X, Y, and Z thing happens in the offseason, we lose X, Y, and Z thing, maybe I would just like to feel like I left with everything being put out there on the field to produce the most hard to accomplish feat of winning a Super Bowl. So if Stafford retires, that is what is going to completely alter and change this decision, because then you kind of have to really sit there and go, all right, well, now we don't have anything. Are we a team that thinks that we could go and maybe turns Trey Lance into something, go turn Mac Jones into something, turn Kyler Murray into something, turn Tua into something? Those aren't exactly exciting options, and that could result more in a downturn than trying to invest in one of these youngsters with Fernando Mendoza and Dante Moore. I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers, though, Ryan, are an example of a team that did not effectively handle that transition with a premier veteran when they had Ben Roethlisberger. They were at the top, and big, fat, old Big Ben was still throwing for 400 yards in some instances, and then it just came all crashing down. You get Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph and all these nobodies that just couldn't play very well, and they're in the worst possible spot because they keep winning just enough to get to the playoffs or to be at least near there, and that means they're going to be picking in the 20s to potentially as high as like 25. Whatever happens, to move up to find somebody is going to require ridiculous draft capital unless you think that you can get Ty Simpson, who they'd probably still need to go and trade up for. The Steelers are in the worst possible spot, and I think out of anybody, they need to stop piddling around with this. They need to find somebody young to build around. Otherwise, this is just going to be a continuous stopgap situation for veterans that do just enough and then struggle down the stretch, and they don't do enough to carry them to the playoffs.
Oh, a phrase that we used to talk about a lot in the old days, Joe, is quarterback purgatory. This is quarterback purgatory in Pittsburgh because you just keep recycling veterans, right? In terms of, you obviously you went out and got Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Rodgers is still playing good for a 42-year-old, obviously very good for a 42-year-old. But the point is that he doesn't have a runway of winning. He doesn't have a winning window that's applicable more than likely after this year. So you're a team, and I think there's a lot of the frustration from the Pittsburgh fan base with the Mike Tomlin right now is that Mike Tomlin is obviously a good coach, and he's a good enough coach where they're going to be picking in the 20s every single year. They're going to be making the playoffs every single year. But there is a conversation of stagnation at some point where it's like, guys, we're not actually getting any better. Like, we're staying exactly the same. So we're not bad enough to make an aggressive play for resetting the future, but we're also not good enough to win a Super Bowl. Like, that is where I read some stat, Joe, and don't quote me on this, but do you know the Steelers haven't won a playoff game since like 2017 or something like that? 2018?
And it makes sense because and every time that they play these games, their defense plays their asses off, and then whoever's at quarterback just completely plays like ass.
It's crazy, dude. So, I mean, they are in the toughest spot ever because, I mean, are you going to jump from 20-something to top 5? I mean, can you imagine the capital that you're going to have to give up? Like, you're probably going to have to offload a really good veteran on top of 3 first-round picks to even try to make some type of move like that happen. So, I mean, they're in a really, there is no team that is in a worse situation for the quarterback board having less depth than we thought it was going to have. As soon as Lenore Sellers goes back to school, as soon as John Mateer starts trending downward, as soon as Brandon Sorsby most likely opts for the portal and transfer elsewhere, the Steelers were the team that was maybe affected more than just about anybody in terms of options that were on the table. So should they be aggressive? Probably. But if we're being predictive, I think they're just going to try to recycle the next veteran quarterback. And I don't know who that guy is. Like, maybe that's a Geno Smith after the disastrous season he's had with the Raiders. I don't see them going after a guy like...
That's disgusting if that's what they're...
I don't see him going after a guy like Tua because Tua sucks in the cold. Like, why am I going to go and get a guy to bring him up to Pittsburgh?
Right.
You know, like it's such a tough spot. Maybe they're a Mac Jones team for a year. Like, I have no idea, but they are in a really bad spot from a program perspective, from an organizational perspective.
I'm still in favor of the Trey Lance reclamation project. Here's what I think that the best case scenario for you is. Yes, you're going to have to go find another veteran that's maybe not as a big of a name. Maybe that is Mac Jones, and see if you can bring him in. But you need to hope that Ty Simpson plays really well against Indiana.
Yeah.
And maybe someone's listening to this like a week after that game and going, uh-oh, or they're going, ha, he did. But you need Ty Simpson to finish the season well. He had a really solid game, in my opinion, against Oklahoma, where he kind of showed us the toughness against pressure and the big playmaking ability that we saw throughout the year. If he accomplishes that and he's worthy of a first-round pick, and I think that he still will be, I think some teams will talk themselves into it, hoping that he falls out of the top 10 and that you can trade up to like 12. And you don't need to completely bend over backwards to go and get somebody. I don't think it's unreasonable to think that you couldn't get a Bo Nix type of a season out of Ty Simpson in his first year in the NFL. I think that Bo Nix was highly impactful for the Broncos and then has taken a leap forward. And it hasn't exactly been a top 10 quarterback, but he's done just enough. You need somebody who does just enough. That's what they thought that they were getting with Kenny Pickett, but apparently he does absolutely nothing. You need to get somebody who just keeps the ship moving forward instead of whatever limited options there are in free agent. There just needs to be youth in the room. I feel like going for a veteran again is just going to continue extending this issue.
You know what's funny is you kind of took like one talking point I was going to have, Joe, because this is going to sound so negative, right? Like it's going to like everyone's going to listen to this and be like, Ryan's an asshole, and it's fine. Ryan is an asshole sometimes, but is Ty Simpson potentially what you thought you were getting in Kenny Pickett if you're the Steelers? I mean, like he's the 20th overall selection, right? Mm-hmm. Ty Simpson's better than a better prospect than Kenny Pickett, even though I'm not the biggest Ty Simpson fan of all time, but like I remember laughing when the Steelers drafted the hometown kid with the in Kenny Pickett, the Pitt Panther, great, right? So it wouldn't be the worst move of all time, but I'm also again like I would not be excited about giving up too much capital in order to get him. I think one thing that you said is perfect is like it has to be in the right range. Like I'm not jumping from 22, let's say 22 to 10, because jumping up 12 picks, man, that's going to be a wild number. Like it's going to be a wild number. But if if Ty Simpson falls to like let's say 15. Would you give it a look? I mean, maybe, possibly.
Oh, yeah. That's when you go, all right, we got this thing sorted. Like, let's go get the kid. Like, let's just save ourselves.
But even that still feels like quarterback purgatory to me because it's like, again, Ty Simpson's better than probably the other options that are out there in free agency and maybe low-end trades that you're going to get if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. But is Ty Simpson so good that he's going to win a Super Bowl for you one day with the Pittsburgh Steelers? Probably not. So I would argue that you're going to continue staying in purgatory, but it's also something that I think that the Steelers might not need to do because they are in a weird spot of desperation, assuming that Aaron Rodgers is going after this year, which I would be surprised if Aaron Rodgers is not going after this year. Double negative there, but yeah.